Had a nice Thanksgiving break. Hopefully you had some time off. If not, well, hopefully it wasn't too much work. So the first item, well, first I guess we'll call the meeting to order, but the first order of business is to approve the meeting minutes from our last meeting, which was September 19th. I think everybody has those. We have a motion to approve the meeting minutes. Approve. Second, okay. All those in favor? Okay, unanimous.
Second.
What's that?
Who was the second?
I moved. I don't know who moved to approve. I
I
thought I
think
did.
Paul moved. You need a second.
I- I-
Second, all right. we're good.
Julian, your second.
We had all the hands up. All right, so the next item is actually not on the agenda, but it's an adjustment. So I'd like to make a motion to adjust the agenda. We did not include time for public comment at the end, and that's my omission. But we do want to do that as we usually do. So I guess I'll motion to add that to the agenda.
Second.
Second, all right, all those in favor? Okay, unanimous. Okay, the next item is an update on the council action regarding the land. So I don't know, John, if you want to give an update or
Give
Nick
an
or.
update and maybe fill in any other stuff. So at our last council meeting, we were considering doing a resolution to delay some of the land actions. I think through the discussion, we ultimately, as a body, voted unanimously to not move the actions forward. I can say that was something that I think all of us kind of struggled with because myself, having sat through the site selection process, knew that there weren't many options, but my biggest concern, and still my biggest concern, is even if we kept that option alive, I'm not sure if that would have just created more of a headwind for the next round, that it would have continued to fail, and then the option would have expired, and we wouldn't have land, and we would have to renegotiate at that point. So I just figured, for me personally, when I voted, it was to kind of cut our losses and remove any headwinds that we could, based on the fact that, you know, it failed 65%. And so something needed to change. And I think taking the downs out of the equation, unfortunately, I think there is a lot of, there's strong public opinion, I think, about the downs, the relationship between the town and the downs, that I fear that that's gonna muddy what we're really trying to do, which is find a school solution, and would continue to kind of create an unnecessary headwind, and that it would be better to just find a different site. So that's why I voted the way I did and said, you know, let's just cut this now and move forward so that we can find the right site, or again, even if perhaps in the next round we don't need a site, there's some other solution we can come up with that we go that path. So I think we voted down all the actions, and then I think at the next council meeting, there's an official action, I'm assuming, to authorize the town manager to cancel the option agreement. And so that will be the more official action that will take place at the next council meeting.
Okay.
I don't know, Nick, if there's anything you want
That's
to
a pretty
add.
good synopsis of what happened, I think. And I would just reiterate too, that letting go of the current land option deal that we have in place does not prohibit anyone from pursuing land in the downs. What it will do, though, is remove the Downs's obligation to the town to preserve some land for use for the school. I think that's the bigger
Yeah.
loss, but it
Yeah.
doesn't mean that if at the end of the day, new sites are approached again and reevaluated again, it does not mean that couldn't possibly end up back in a similar vicinity to what the land was, just that they're no longer obligated to hold.
Yeah, and I will say, since the school failed, there have been some leads that have come forward as a result of the failure. Like, again, Two Rod Road came back again to Tom and said, we're still interested if you guys are. I know we felt like it wasn't an ideal site compared to the Downs, but I mean, there are still willing sellers that we may, if we decide to do something with, could pursue. So there's that lead, and then there's some others that I think he's testing the waters a little bit. Again, time has passed since the last site selection, so real estate's always changing, and so who knows, in the next 3 to 6 months, there could be a willing seller that comes forward that might be a better property overall. And so I think the town, I'm guessing, is still committed to helping with the site selection. If there's a need for a site, as we go forward with the next round of the solution and work collaboratively to figure that out. I will say, you know, and Counselor Seifler brought this up at the meeting, and I know she's on, so she can always speak. I thought she was. I thought I saw her. Okay. You know, we didn't like, I want to say that, you know, the action we took wasn't intended to be a disrespectful slight to the committee or to the board by taking that action when we did. I think it was, you know, through the discussion, I think we all kind of landed on the same conclusion that given the amount that the school failed, given the feedback we heard throughout the process around concerns about the downs, that this was just a way to move forward and pull a real blocker from the equation so that we can start fresh with the community and figure out, okay, if we pull that out of the equation, where do we go from here together to find the right solution? So I apologize if anybody feels that we should have consulted with anybody beforehand, but I think we ultimately kind of went, at least I did, went with my gut that night and said, this is a change we can make that can show the public we're listening and hopefully start the conversation fresher with a different lens without that cloud hanging over us.
Yeah, I think I just add to it that I think, you know, in this, we need to look at this as opportunity. You have an opportunity now in front of you to re-engage with the community who seems to now be awake, active, and ready to help.
Yeah.
So let's take advantage of it for what it's worth. Let's find out what this community really wants going forward and make it happen. So like I said, with every downside, there's always a, you know, silver lining somewhere. And I think that's where we are today. And I think we have a great opportunity in front of us to kind of reevaluate how we can make this work.
Any
questions or comments? Good. All right, we appreciate the update. There's nothing else on that. We'll move to the next item in the agenda, which is, so I thought it would be good. I know Shannon and I and Jeff had some conversations around, you know, the committee. You know, certainly there's a need to bolster the committee and bring in some fresh eyes and some additional help. Certainly we have many committed members, but there's always a need for more. So I guess what I think we wanted to have sort of a conversation around tonight was sort of a few things, refreshing the charter, right? Because we need to make sure the charge is clear. The committee membership, I had on there the governance and the interview process. So, you know, my thought is that I think we should completely reopen the process. So including, you know, even current members, if they're interested, you know, needing to express an interest to continue. And then, so, you know, also set a timeline for the refresh committee. So I guess just on that, just kind of reflecting, you know, in the fall of 2019, I joined the committee because there was a need for, you know, sort of a long-term planning process to support the students and the teachers here in the town. Committee's charge was, you know, to reassess the work that's been completed by the committee, the previous committee at that time, to determine what an optimal solution was. And ultimately, we had determined that it was, you know, prohibitively expensive to renovate the existing schools, and that came from a number of different outside expertise and engineers and architects, including, you know, some of the folks here in this room. And so it was determined that it wasn't physically feasible to do that. The optimal choice the committee arrived at for safety, security, transportation, educational services and costs was to build a new K through 3 school that would ultimately help to also eliminate overcrowding at the middle school. So again, you know, over the years, I think a lot of us in this room have put, you know, really hundreds of hours into analyzing capacity plans, researching available land locations, and also talking with community members and educators. And so now I guess, you know, following the failed referendum, it's really time that we come together as a community to not only review the work that's done, but also reestablish new goals and develop a refreshed path forward that ultimately will support our students and teachers here, in this great community. And for future generations, right? This is, something I've said before, and, you know, it's time to pay it forward, right? We live in a community and we have students that, that are sort of owed the same, opportunities that we, were afforded. So with that, you know, for me personally, at this time, with my current professional obligations and family commitments, I can't, seek a reappointment. I won't be seeking reappointment as the committee chair. But it's certainly my sincere hope that, more members from the community come forward and are able to, you know, step up and forge a new path forward. And really, you know, put the time into, coming up with a solution that will work. I'm not going away. I'm gonna be here for, questions, and, you know, certainly, we'll stay engaged, but, just as far as, you know, continuing, I'm not gonna be able to, seek reappointment. So with that, I think, we can certainly dive into the, you know, the elements of, you know, happy to have, you know, the discussion around the membership and the interview process. So I think those things are really important, in making sure that we, sort of have the right cross-section of representation across the committee. And I'm happy to help with that process. So.
I'm happy to dive in, but not before we thank you so very much for all that you've done. It is, I don't even know that hundreds of hours really conveys the amount of work and dedication you've had to this committee, this town, the teachers, the staff, the kids, the parents, to everybody here. And it, this doesn't feel good. I hate that. I understand, but I also hate it at the same
Yeah.
time. And I want to beg you to stay, but I also know you have a life and you have a family and you have a job, and this is a lot of work, and it has been a lot of work, and
Well, I think
we
for me,
greatly appreciate you.
yeah, thank you very much for that. I think the big part for me is that this is going to require, you and I've had a conversation around, it's gonna require a lot of effort.
Yeah,
And, you know, I'd been able to do that earlier. My role has changed in where I work, and so that level of effort is no longer realistic.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure that this gets the attention that it needs. So again, I'm not going anywhere. I'm still a Scarborough resident. And I'm still gonna be here, and I'm probably will blow up your email, but so.
well, we
happy
look forward to that.
Thank you, Dana.
Yeah. So, with that, I think, you know, obviously I think we've got a lot of interest from other people, right,
Yeah.
in terms of membership.
I think we're up to, 16 people so far.
So I think there's a couple things. One is the vetting process. You know, I'm happy to provide input on that. I think we need to look at the cross-section of needs, right? So there's needs in every area, from technical to, you know, organizational, you know, organizing these meetings. We all kind of did it as sort of a thing that just between us, we all kind of made it happen, and we had a lot of help from different people, but it was always a scramble. So I think there's a need there. We've got a communications committee as well that we need to look at, and I think that deserves sort of another look. Certainly that's you know, to your point, Nick, I think engaging the community is something that we really struggled with. And I almost think maybe the vote was the way that, because I would say after the vote, you know, I got a lot of phone calls from people going like, what happened? Like, why? You know, and some people even said that they didn't vote, and they were really upset that they didn't. So, you know, I think that engagement is important, not only from understanding what's required, but also making sure people are aware of what is happening. And so that's an area where I think we're gonna need a lot of effort.
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess let's open it up to, you know, other thoughts on, you know, so the communications, the vetting process. I think there's a lot there.
Yeah. I know that there's been, I guess I'll start with some of the things I've heard. And I will be very transparent with, I am not in favor of existing existing committee members, stepping aside. I'm
Yeah.
outside of what you have said. I think we've had people that have worked on this committee for many, many years. I think that there is a lot of historical knowledge here that if we are going to say everybody out, we lose a lot of history and a lot of knowledge that we cannot, quite frankly.
No, and
afford to
I
lose.
certainly wouldn't suggest that,
No.
but I do think we, I think there should be an opportunity for people to say, hey, I'm interested in continuing, or hey, I'd like to do something
Yeah.
different
Mhm.
or more or less. I think we just want to make sure that we sort of, sort of like when you do reorganization, you kind of look at all the people and, say, hey, okay, where are your interests and
Yeah.
where can you best contribute? So
Yeah,
I do
and
think that's important.
yeah, I agree with you. And I think that, to Nick's point, we have this opportunity where there is interest. I think that along the way, we were screaming for the community to be involved, and it is what it is. You're involved when you're involved, right? And I think when the community came along in this process, decisions had already been made. And so at that point, it was too late to say, okay, well, let's go back and relook, because we were already on the ballot. We were already moving to referendum. We were already at a different place. And so we have this really good opportunity to involve the community more so than they have been in the past. It's just, what does that look like? And hopefully, like I said, which is fantastic, we've had 16 people email in and say that, hey, I'm interested, I want to participate. And so that's quite a bit.
Yep.
Right. And so that is really encouraging. So I do think, I do want to, I guess, strike while the iron's hot and get the people here at the table in the community. There has been some question on, does this committee ask the board to change the number of members and have a set number? Or another school of thought is that you let everybody in who can commit to whatever you as a committee decide you want this committee to look like. So for example, if you have an attendance policy, if somebody can commit to the attendance policy and can commit to being here at all of the meetings, do we just let them in? And do you let them at the table? And so I know that there's both schools of thought. Essentially, from a process standpoint, what would happen is this committee, tonight, you can decide what you want this committee to look like, in terms of members, in terms of process, and then I can take the recommendation back to the board. The board would vote on it as a board committee.
Just one of the questions I would have is, what they're thinking about staying on, people coming on either way, is what's the charge? As far as what's that gonna look like, and then what is that charge linked to, what commitment is the expectation in those subsections of, the engineering section of it, or the communications section of it, what does that require to still be part of that? And then what timeline are we looking at to commit that work? To know that, okay, I could really commit intensely for 6 months, but probably not for 18, and I'm making up that timeline, but you know what I'm saying? What's my, to your point of timeline of family and work, what's those commitments? Because I think anybody getting on board should understand that before they say.
Yeah, I
I'm
think
on
it's.
board, we're meeting twice, 3 times a month to get something done.
I agree. I think I think there needs to be a set meeting schedule, and I think there needs to be, this is something that I struggle with, because, anytime you have multiple committees, like if you break it up and everybody's meeting at different times, it becomes pretty difficult to keep everything aligned. So I would personally recommend something that's a larger committee, with more people, and make it clear that there is an attendance requirement, right? That, to your point, I think there needs to be, the board needs to have something that is written policy on attendance. Because otherwise it just sort of, people come when they can, and that's understandable, but I think we really need dedicated, dedicated commitments. John?
So I don't think we're ready to answer the questions that Todd posed. And part of me wonders, rather than talking about like the official building committee, maybe it's more establishing an ad hoc committee to help us listen, understand, and learn from the public and the community what we can do differently and what we need to consider to shape the next solution, so that we can then form the official committee. I feel like we're kind of talking about forming a committee right now with no charge or reassessing the committee with no charge. I feel like what we need to be doing right now is a lot of engagement. And I think the question we're trying to answer a little bit is how do we harness all this new participation and make sure that everybody has an opportunity to be involved to help shape the next solution. So I feel like that to me should be our charge right now is how do we leverage this engagement to help us better shape what the committee should look like, what committees, what solution we're going after, like do a little bit of pause, reflect and listening before we try and move forward too quickly, too fast.
Yeah, I think that was kind of my thinking as well, in terms of, you know, the building steering committee, whether you call it the building steering committee or something else. And that was, my thought tonight is, you know, I think the Board of Education needs to discuss it, because without, when you look at the building committee's charter way back from 2019, our charter was to go look at the solution and propose, you know, what was the optimal solution. That's different now.
Yeah.
And I don't know that we can make a recommendation as a committee on what to do next. That really has to come from the school board. So
So maybe it's kind of like an after action committee to just assess the situation, help with outreach, public engagement. Again, it would be nice if we could potentially have like some sort of community charrette on this at some point in the future to really get some insights and feedback. So in my mind, it may not be the building committee, it may be the board authorizing some sort of community group to help us explore, understand, learn, but we'll still need the expertise from this body that had participated in the solution. Because the one thing people are going to need to know is, well, how did we get to this solution? Those questions will come up and we need the experts who participated in it to help.
I do think that there is an educational component that would be helpful. And, you know, almost before you do that, because there is still a lot of misunderstanding around, can you put a second floor on the existing schools? You know, can you do this? Can you do that? Those are things that have been researched in, you know, painful detail over and over again. And I think it's important that the basis of understanding is created so that whoever that group is doesn't spend an inordinate amount of time frustrating people, you know, with answers that, you know, I think there's information that can be put out there in advance that will help people come up to speed on some of the questions that they're asking. So may almost be an FAQ.
I see it kind of being potentially even simultaneous. Because I think that the communications part that we're looking for is almost like an extension of what the communications committee has been doing to gather more feedback at this point now. And, you know, we can start, you know, spreading more in terms of the news, in terms of what we have looked at. But I think that, like you said, a lot of the questions and comments that we've got so far have been things that we've studied in depth, but let's get those comments anyway, and then be able to respond to them.
I think it's important to know that, right? Because I know we feel like we communicated that, but if it didn't land, or if people are still questioning some of
We need a better way to.
And so, again, doing that outreach again, to just understand how much of those things didn't land is important that we understand that so that we can, one, re-educate everybody as a starting point, but then say, where do we go from here? And again, even in some ways, maybe test some of these decisions that we did make as we felt was completely like, you know, that was, you know, like, I know we can't add a second floor to the schools, but, you know, when it comes to some of the properties, we kind of said, we're not gonna like talk to surrounding property owners to acquire their properties. Like that was kind of off the table. Should that be on the table as we go forward to say, maybe that's something we took off because we said we're not going to go that path, but maybe that is an assumption that we had before that we need to test again. And
I think we did do that though.
Do we reach out to the homeowners and see if they were willing to sell?
To people that had, you know, either tracts of land that were big enough, but we didn't. You're talking around the existing
Yes,
schools.
yeah. Then that's just like an example. Like
Sure,
that was
sure.
like something we said, we're not going to do that.
Yeah.
And that limited us to the current property. But if we open our minds a little bit to say, well, again, I'm not proposing we do that. I'm just saying that was an assumption we had that shaped the direction we went, and do we need to retest some of these assumptions and run them to ground again, just to confirm that that's an actual fact? And do that more collaboratively with the public so that they can kind of understand that as well.
I think going back to, like, I think the first and most important thing is sort of, you know, coming up with what's the new charge, right? What's the ask, right? Maybe the ask isn't building steering committee members, maybe the ask is, to your point, like, how do we formulate the new charge? And so I think that's ultimately the work that have to be done. And maybe there's you know, an internal cross-functional team, I guess, sort of between existing members and Board of Education members to sort of brainstorm how to work through what the next steps are. Even before you get to, you know, committee membership and that type of thing.
So if I could ask anyone here, can anyone here tell me why specifically the school failed? Or I could say it a different way. Can anyone tell me the solution that would pass at this stage?
No.
And the answer is no.
No.
So I struggle with the idea of forming a committee to go find a solution when we have no information as to what that solution looks like. We really just don't. We have an idea. We have feelings. We talk to people, but they're anecdotal. And before you send out 20 people on a mission, I think it'd be wise to understand what can garner the support of this community and then build upon that.
Prioritized is what I think, because I've thought a lot about this too, and the feedback we've got in terms of why people voted no, they're conflicting reasons. You know, one will say it's because of cost, but another will say it's because they want the existing neighborhood schools. They can't have both. You know, the neighborhood schools are gonna be far more expensive to renovate than the cost of a brand new school. So which one is more important to the community? I think that's what we need to find out through that communications effort.
Relative importance.
And I think that formulates how you move forward as a committee, that's what your charge is, what you know, I don't want to see this community spend a lot of time and money and resources and goodwill. I mean, we're talking hundreds of hours here, Dana. You know, of family time that, well, I mean, it's not just Dana, all of you have sacrificed, you know,
And I
to
think
find a solution.
it's important to, and also important as the group moves forward to also base yourself on the facts, right? Because there is enrollment demand that has to be met. That's something, and you can't move that needle. Those are things that are really not negotiable. So it's sort of like saying, well, I only want to make part of my mortgage payment. Thanks. I'm not gonna let that happen. And Scarborough has, you know, something in front of it that it's gonna have to address, and that's the enrollment. We know those numbers are real.
I guess that would be my other piece of advice for at least the school board to discuss is, should there be a parallel process for triage? If you can't have a solution for our children presented and available by the time some of the big, you know, the bubble comes, right? How are we gonna handle that? And should that be a parallel process? And it's a break in case of emergency type of deal? Is there a, you know, just for the
I
board
think-
consideration?
Well, no, I
you know?
think that there's three paths here and it involves different groups of people. So you've got one path that is the, I'm going to say the community trust piece. And that is the piece that I think belongs to the board and the town council together. So that's the stuff we talked about at our workshop. I know we talked about holding a counselor corner in December and really like starting that process to build that. So that's piece one. Piece two, you have, or actually I guess 4 tracks. Piece two, you have one of the outcomes of that workshop was we all committed to doing a survey, a community survey. So we had asked Kate to look for money to do that survey. She believes she has located some, hopefully it's going to be in the long range planning bucket, but some funds to do that. So my next step there is to reach out to Tom and to the council and get that process rolling. But that's a 6 to 8 week process that we heard at the workshop. That will give us the answers that we are all saying that we need here to move forward. So during that 6 to 8 weeks, what I don't want to lose sight of is the interest in the community and the I don't want that time to be wasted time where we're not doing anything on the building steering committee, because the building steering committee is going to be needed regardless of what that survey says, because the schools are inefficient as they are. So we still need a solution. So while the survey is going, can we work through the process of seating the next building steering committee that then gets the survey results, that then works on all of the things moving forward? I think both of those could run parallel. And then there is a document, we as a school board have started creating governance documents. We started with our other committee that's community member based, that's our diversity, equity, and inclusion committee. So Dana and I have been working on one for this committee that's very similar. I went back and read through all of the old documents. I have the old charge. We did put an attendance procedure in. So there's things that we have that I can send out, but really, I think all of this can happen simultaneously. I don't think it's putting the cart before the horse. I think it's more to Dana's larger point. These kids are coming. We know we aren't going to have a school in time. So that's the fourth track. We have to triage. And that is, I think, more of a board and Todd. Todd, we have a long range planning committee, then that Todd sits on that with some of our board members. And that's really what they're going to have to look at, is how do we triage the students that we know are coming that we no longer have a solution for. So all of those things have to happen essentially at the same time, in my mind, have to happen at the same time.
It sounds though like my thought is for your first one, the community trust and building. I think that's a charge we can give to both communications committees for both bodies to work on collaboratively together. And then you mentioned the triage track could go to the school long range planning committee. So that's getting addressed. I still feel and agree with Nick that really the initial work needs to be on community outreach and understanding. And a survey is one element, but I feel like there's more than just a survey. Like the survey is going to give us information. I guess I have a hard time knowing, is the survey going to be complete without knowing what it is? That's going to give us the information we need to take action. And I say that because even for the community survey that we do, which is pretty robust, it's a perception survey. So it gives you some directional feedback, but in order to like understand the why, it doesn't give you the details. So I worry that we're going to do a survey and it's going to give us some information, but it's not going to give us the answers we need to dig in more with the public to really understand what we want to do going forward. So I think it's bigger than just the survey. And I think there's opportunity, like we need to do the survey. I'm not saying we don't do it, but how do we, again, harness the public engagement that we have in parallel through focus groups, through, you know, holding community sessions at the different schools. I don't know what the solution is, but just like if people are showing up and willing to come, like let's have events and things for them to come to while we do the survey in parallel to supplement the survey with other information. And even ask the community the question of like, well, what should we do going forward? Like even some of the things you mentioned, like we can definitely do a survey, an official survey, but some of that stuff we can just ask people in a more unofficial manner and still get good information. So
if people will show for a forum, I think then that's a fantastic way to get it. Probably we've had difficulty getting the people who aren't interested in or didn't want the school to pass to come to the forums. But stressing that importance at this point.
Little did the people know behind us that they're all signed up for the forum and are going to bring 5 friends to come to the forum. Well, so again, like I think there's people willing to do it, and I think we just got to ask. We got to ask for their help.
More than
I heard some woohoos, so.
We just gotta make sure too, the survey gets us the answers. It gives us direction, right? Like to your financial question, if you voted no for the school for the dollar, and then you could have your 3 elementaries renovated for the same dollar, would you vote yes? Like those are, it's gotta be pared down to be able to give some structural legitimacy to the answer, because in each bucket that we think we know, because there's probably 5 that affected. So how do you triage those questions down to be able to get specifics?
I mean, in some of these talks, in some of the public comments we've heard, I can't even pinpoint who they are. They might be somebody in this room, but I have said, well, I have experience in this, I mean, maybe they would step forward and help us shape some of that.
Yeah.
I'm sure, we have a lot of smart community members, I'm sure we could use that help. I mean, I don't know, we've kind of talked about two different types of surveys, like a formal survey that the town does
Mhm.
versus like an in-house something or other. So we
Yeah.
have to really, we need to figure that out. Probably the school board would have to vote on that.
Yeah, it's my understanding when we left the workshop, we were going with the more formalized version.
Okay.
Because the problem with the in-house is that there's not that validity that happens, right? And so when you do a community-wide survey with a company that is used to doing it, that's one of the things you get from it. And then they would help, they being the contractor, could help us write the questions so that, to your point, we're getting at the pieces of information that we need. So we kind of, from my understanding from the town council process, you kind of provide what you're looking for, and then they draft up questions accordingly. And then they would come back, again, the consultants would come back afterward and present
Mhm.
on all of the
Can we do
information they
both?
got.
Like, I think to
Yeah.
Jillian's point, like, I hate the idea of waiting 8 weeks to ask for feedback when people are very much paying attention.
Yeah.
So can we do a very simple survey that may better inform the questions we want to ask in a more formal survey? Like, I just feel like there's enough people paying attention right now that, especially after Christmas, after the new year, I feel like we're gonna lose people. And
Yeah.
while it's top of mind and people remember, like 8 weeks from now, if you ask me why I did what I did, I would be like, I don't remember, like, I've moved on. So is there something we can do that's simple, easy, 10 questions or less, that just, again, reaches out and asks for feedback? And then we do that more formal survey work later.
You can see it even.
Yes, that we get that information out, because it's, it's great that we have engaged some parts of the community, but I think as a committee, part of the struggle has been, that ongoing narrative of nobody knows, nobody has any information, nobody knows where to look for information. And so, my concern around just putting a survey out
Mhm.
is people who are engaged will answer the survey, but there may be many other constituents in the community who aren't engaged.
Yeah.
And so it's going to impact what that result looks like.
I think we just have to be honest that this is gonna be a biased result for those willing to participate until we do the right thing, which is mailing and scientific sampling, et cetera. So I think we do that, but I will say, when I first joined the council, one of the things I did, and I got some heat for it, and I don't think I would do it again, but it was a good learning. I worked with one counselor, we put out a survey, and all we did was post it online, and we got like 800 responses. And all we're doing for the town scientifically valid survey is shooting for 600. So I think we can get some good information, and even if it's just the people who are willing to participate and it tends to lean a certain way because it's not scientifically valid, I still think that's valuable information that we ask people to provide. And if they want to participate, great. And it's going to help us look at it to say, well, it seems from this segment that may not be scientifically representative of the community. There's clearly a huge concern about XYZ cost or whatever that we need to kind of consider as we go forward. So again, I think as long as we're honest that this is like preliminary information to help shape a more robust survey or just shape some thoughts as we go forward, I think we just got to set the right expectation with the people who participate.
I think to help that too, sorry, if people are willing to answer how they voted, which would give them the option, you could say like, if you voted yes, or did you vote yes or no, first of all? And then if they can say whether they did or not, it can be unanimous, so they don't have to, whatever. But then from there, say like, which of these issues, like addressing all the different questions, rate them, say like, 1 to 10. How important is cost? How important is this? Something framed like that, so we can see very clearly, is it a skewed sort of response because we're only hearing from the people that voted yes? So that was like, this was the most important thing to them. But then for the people who voted no, we can see what's the most
Yeah.
important thing to them too. So I think the more data, the
Yeah.
better. It can't hurt to have more data.
I would say the interesting thing, even about the town survey, when we did the scientific sample last time, so we did the scientific sample and then we opened it up to the broader public. And we got two separate results. And the results were a lot more similar than they were different. Like there was very little differences. It'll be interesting to see if that holds up for this next survey, to see if when we open it up to the general public, if we get the same information. So again, I think the information would be biased, that we would have to understand if we went out in a less formal way, but I still think, to your point, it's good information.
And we can understand where the bias is sometimes based on.
So I want to throw
Can I
caution.
jump in real quick? Sorry, it's hard. I know I'm the only one on Zoom, but I just want to caution everybody a little bit that to make a distinction between doing a pre-survey and then a scientifically valid survey. Like, we're going to run into fatigue. That's going to potentially confuse people why they are filling out more than one survey. And so I'm not trying to play devil's advocate and poo-poo a pre-survey necessarily, but I do have some concerns that if we're going to invest all this money in a statistically valid survey, that putting out some kind of informal survey first that drives at those same questions might confuse people, and that it might lead to them not answering the second round of survey.
True.
Yeah, I was
People,
gonna say the same thing and say, if you're gonna do one, why do the other?
Well,
Like-
April stole my thunder there, but excellent work. So the reason I would caution against it would be is if you actually do receive two different subsets of data. And then you have members that are maybe putting heavier stock in a straw poll versus a statistically valid survey. I do see a benefit, though, of maybe doing the informal survey that would request feedback on what people would like to see. Because that can be actually formulated like, what's your great idea for our school solution? Asking people for that information is not something you probably capture on a statistically valid survey as to cost, location, size, yada, yada, yada.
I
So-
think you can though.
On the statistically valid, it's possible depending on how you phrase the questions, but I don't want to see two subsets of data being used either, and that could conflict and create complete chaos within the committee.
Right, no, I guess what I'm suggesting is that we do a statistically valid survey and we have it, an open-ended question like you're suggesting, so that people can offer some of that information as part of that, right? There are a lot of mixed methods surveys
Sure.
that are done as part of research. And so I don't necessarily see this as an either or we've got to do this one way and this a different way.
Maybe it's not
What's
a-
important is to get as much as we can.
Maybe it's not a pre-survey. I take that back. I don't think we should do a pre-survey based on what April said. She's so smart. But what I do want to do is harness the engagement we have, even if it's just focus groups or going to neighborhoods like we did prior to the referendum, where we just say, we're gonna host something. Again, if we get 3 people that show up, that's fine. I would hope that more people would show up than just 3. But again, getting that engagement while we have it is really what I hope we do, and don't take 8 weeks to get a survey out. Like, what can we do in the interim that doesn't put the survey at risk, but at least allows us to be open and have a way for people to share their input. Again, just while they're engaged in here.
Yeah, one of the things that I think about when I hear you say that is, several years ago, when there was community planning happening, right? There was open space above Scarborough grounds, people could go and offer all of those ideas. It was kind of like a think tank that took place over like a short period of
It's called
time,
Planet
right?
Limsa,
Yeah.
they called it.
Right.
Yeah.
So, is something like that in order here in terms of how do we draw out some of those other ideas that, that many members of the community should
Yeah.
have?
Well, and I will say, like, the town has had a lot of success, and aren't you about to do a charrette? So when we do these charrettes, we did one for transportation, Todd's about to do one for community services. Catalog, right?
Yeah, activities.
So again, I think if
What are you calling it?
they're called charrettes. I don't know what
design terms.
Yeah. But again, it's just an opportunity for people to come and,
meeting.
yeah,
Series of meetings.
yeah.
And I think, one of the things that I'll just throw out there is that I really think one of the most important things that has to be addressed is how to engage the community, because to your point, and you'll remember this, we did charrette.
Yeah,
The first time around.
Yeah.
Mhm.
we did multiple.
Yeah, there were more than one. So I think that engagement is really important.
Mhm.
People have to get out there, and we have to figure a way, how do we get the message out to people and get them engaged? Maybe the vote was what it took to do that. But I think that's important because that design work, that would be the starting point. It's the last, sure.
I think what I was struggling is nice thing. I think Nick's point is well spoken in the sense of like knowing what people want, but when they're given the choice, what would they choose? Because to say, again, I would assume everybody in any community, the financial consideration is always, you can say education is number one, but when you put a dollar to it, it's financial is gonna be pretty close to that. And so this number is too big, but if a solution came forward, I'm totally making this up, it's three quarters of the cost, but it's 3/4 of the problem solution, is that value? And how do you get that to know you're on the right path? And I think that's where the trap is.
Mhm.
To get to a point where, the number comes down, it makes people, like, yes, I vote, but it only delivers half a solution that maybe, when you start breaking that down, you're paying just as much for a quarter of a solution, which you still have to deal with. And so how do we make sure we're getting input? I think the education piece is important for some of these choices. I don't know how we prioritize that sooner than later.
Like if it went back to just a K-2 solution, is that
Whatever.
taking a certain amount off, does
I think
that?
you always start with requirements, right? I mean,
Right.
that's,
Yeah, we do have.
you have to start with the requirements. They have to accommodate the enrollment. Has to, so I think that's probably one of the big things that'll have to be, sort of rechartered. The answers could be, the numbers could be different, and maybe even another enrollment study would need to be done because there's been, more growth and.
But I think all the pieces have to be shared, and again, I'm not in favor of any solution right now, but if this is a choice, then these other costs come along with it, so you can see the full spectrum of what that totality of the whole challenge is, whatever choice is made moving forward.
Just getting to action items, I'm just thinking about action items, so it sounds like there's a need to hammer out survey, right? Is that?
Yeah, that's when the school board and the town council's been working on together. Yep.
Engagement strategies is another one.
Yep. And then, so I guess, in parallel, you talked about having the committee do something. Is that, what's the thought there? Is that?
I'm gonna use the new word I've learned. Was that a charrette? That feels like something that could be done that to April's point about the weariness that comes from the surveys, there's also your survey that's out there. So
Yeah, more
we've
fatigue.
got, quite a few things going in that sense. But one thing that struck me a lot because I felt like we were communicating, but we weren't getting to people like we needed to. So to Dana's point, we had, I think 3 that I can think of off the top of my mind, community forums where like one of the people that was here was there and there was maybe 5 others, right? And so we weren't getting to them in a way that they needed to be communicated to. And it's like, again, came along in the process when we were already in decision mode. So can we hold these listening sessions or planning sessions with the community during the 6 to 8 weeks that we're waiting for the survey to come? That to me feels like a little bit of both.
I think there could also be, a lot to gain from, I think one piece of advice that I'll give to the town council is that I think the town council needs to elevate this project up to that level, right? I mean, I think there's been a lot of like, the Board of Education, which, hey, there is a certain element of that. But at the end of the day, it's an issue that the town faces. And I think using that platform may gain more engagement. So, I would that would be my piece of advice to the town council, is just to make sure that, you know, you guys work together with the Board of Education to really elevate that.
You're spot on. This is a community-wide problem. It's not a school board problem. It's not a town council problem. It's our problem.
Yeah.
So let's all be part of the solution.
Yeah.
And I think you have full commitment from April and John. I'm gonna dare to speak on behalf of other counselors at this moment, but you have our support. This is for all of us.
I think there's a big thing though with the platform, right? Because it just, you get a lot more engagement through that group. So that might be a way to increase the
Yeah.
ability, you know what I mean?
I mean, some of this, whether it's a board committee or council committee or whatever, but I think to your point, the branding of this is, if we rebrand this as, this is a joint council board building committee.
Yeah.
Where maybe perhaps the board is really the driver of the charge and the work, but it comes across as like a true joint,
Town sponsored
yeah.
project, which I think it should be. I mean, it's probably one of it.
I feel like we've unofficially been doing that, but I mean,
Yeah.
I feel like we could
Regardless-
just make it more official.
Yeah, I think organically kind of came to that. But you know, I think the magnitude of the problem sort of deserves the, you know, that full court thrust.
Mhm. And depending on different parts of what needs to be explored, whether it's land. Like, I think I came into this not really understanding how much the town needed to own and drive that portion, which is a pretty big portion.
Yeah.
And so depending on what forms, there's gonna be some town driven ownership and like some of the things I've heard, and again, these are just ideas and I don't know if these will ever come to fruition, was like, you know, the notion of what we're doing with the community center committee, Todd's here. And, you know, again, I think the council has to figure out like, what does that project mean at this point? Where does it sit in priority? But the one thing I think we all know the town wants, that we've seen survey after survey, is they want a pool, right? So I know we talked about that at one point and we kind of said, no, a pool and this solution won't go together. But maybe we need to, again, get creative and revisit some of these things. And that really would be a joint decision between both bodies to say, if we have a school need and there's a desire for a pool, and if we combine those together, would that help from a survey perspective, move things forward where people would be willing to support both? Like, again, I've heard that, and so I'm just sharing that as something
I think
that.
there could be a lot of merit. You know, this is, I'm kind of hearing you kind of go through things. I think there could be a lot of merit between, you know, having a town council board workshop on, you know, how to sort of meld all this together, because there are a lot of competing needs. And I think one of the questions that was fielded a lot by the building committee, and Todd, Todd will attest to this. You know, it was like, well, can we fit in any part of the community center in the school, like you were just mentioning? Like, those are questions that came up along the way. Can we do a pool? Can we do, you know, pickleball courts? And, you know, well, those two things were two separate,
Yeah.
you know, so I think there is merit in sort of holistically looking at things and saying, you know, we're gonna buy land. Should we buy 50 acres?
Yeah.
Instead of 25? Should we buy, you know, enough to accommodate the community center and the school? You know,
Yeah.
Now maybe you're making the problem too big, but I do think there's, you know, going in eyes wide open and understanding, you know, how that solution might work together is important.
I like the positive optimism there. I
Yeah.
looked at it and say, you might create more reasons for people to get to know.
Yeah.
And you had
Well,
a lot of
one the
reasons this time
questions in
around.
the survey, right?
Right.
So I think that's important to understand as you look at what's important to people, right? You know, maybe there is I think that's where a survey will help.
I just hope we go into this a little bit like eyes wide open and ready for creative ideas, even if they're just not the best ideas. Because as I say that before, you know, if cost is really the big driver, adding a pool isn't gonna make it any cheaper.
And a
So
community
again,
center.
yeah,
It's not the big operational recovery.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can't put a pool,
I-
that's where I'm having
yeah.
some like
I
internal.
know.
Yeah, I'm
work.
like literally.
We can't have our
Does it?
kindergartners wandering around near us.
that's,
They want it, but they haven't.
yeah.
Yeah.
Portland schools have pools. Two of the schools, they, Nike
Can't breathe them.
and Talbot, they have pools. You know, it's not, it's,
Yeah.
there's so many choices out there.
Yeah.
No, but I think to the greater point, yeah, coming in here without your mind made up, coming in with an open mind. I had a phone call today about the master plan, the 2017 master plan and the options that were in it and maybe bringing that back out and revisiting those 7 or 8 options again, you know? There's a lot of work that's been done that I think can be harnessed here. It's just coming in with an open mind and being willing to look at it all.
I'm wondering if, to Dana's point about elevating this or making it a bigger thing, is it was former board member Kristen Turner who had done some digging and found, I think in the early 90s or something, that there was a joint facilities committee. I forget what it exactly was
In the
called.
charter.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was in the charter.
Yeah, it was in the charter and then it fell off.
Yeah.
Somehow.
So there used to be a really strong partnership between the town and school on facilities, and somewhere along the way they got separated.
Yeah.
And so maybe it's not, this needs to get rebranded, but maybe there's a more overarching
Yeah.
facilities planning committee that gets reemerged that really is kind of looking across town needs and making sure that when those choices come up, the different committees, the community center, the building committee, the library are all
I mean,
connected and
it's
talking.
important to consider. I mean, it's sort of like, you know, I would love to build a giant garage in my backyard,
Mhm.
but probably need to pay some of my other expenses first.
Yeah.
So, you know, that has to wait.
Well, and I think that's where, you know, we need to do a better job as a town.
Yeah.
Looking holistically and prioritizing and making sure that we're clear.
All right, do you have
so-
some action steps that you want us to bring forward at the board meeting about the size of the committee? Is there thoughts on membership to this committee?
I think, you know, that's probably something that, I would. Because I don't have a recommendation on a specific number, I do think that it's important to have a broad cross-section of, skill sets. I do think you, should have, probably, a couple different, you know, leaders, so there's a leader and a backup, like we had a chair, or vice chair. And I think, you know, the steps that you're taking are by doing the survey, and then, you know, I kind of suggested the town council board workshop. I think that should be an important first step in sort of assessing what is best in terms of the next step. You know, certainly a building committee is needed, but I think it's really important to align that with what the needs are. So certainly more people is better.
How many residents are currently charged to be on it today?
So I went back to the original documents. Initially, the composition was 6 community members, school administrators without a number, so a little bit gray there, 1 teacher, 2 school board members, and then we had 1 counselor, but then the board approved a second, so 2 town counselors.
Mhm. How many residents do we have on the ad hoc community center committee?
They're all residents.
How many?
It's 9.
9. So maybe we should have more.
Yeah, and Wentworth,
That was, what you just recited was only the steering committee. It wasn't the
Yeah.
full building
The
committee.
2019.
yeah, that
Right.
was the original
Correct.
composition, yeah,
Right,
way back
okay.
when, and then we added on the town councilor. I cannot find the documents where we added on more community members, so that piece is lacking. But the Wentworth committee had how many, 40?
45.
46.
But that was,
And we had a separate
Steering
steering
committee,
committee.
yeah.
We had a
Okay.
separate steering committee that was about the size of the one you just referenced, maybe slightly
Yeah.
bigger.
But then the
And then there,
subcommittees.
anybody who wanted to be on the committee for Wentworth was granted access regardless of background, qualifications, knowledge, age, longevity in the town, didn't matter. And it was a great committee. Very successful, and we disagreed on a lot.
So what
We
did
Still got
the,
stuff done.
what did the smaller steering committee do? So that you had your larger committee that was everybody, and then that smaller group that roughly
Yeah,
is this.
It literally steered the committee. It set the agendas, it accomplished timelines for tasks that needed to be completed. And all the way up to referendum. It was basically the leadership group. And then the committee met a lot. I mean,
Yeah.
it was night and day, morning and night we were meeting. And
What was the timeline on that? It's pretty quick.
yeah, it was very quick. Yeah, I mean, we had about a year. It was my very first year here, 2010. And it went to referendum and construction began in 2012.
But that was after it had already failed a couple of times.
Or it failed twice at least.
So if that worked,
Yeah, you guys should have put together like a how-to
yeah.
for the rest.
Well, there also is land already established.
fair.
Yeah, that was the
Then
biggest,
that
the-
piece was
Right.
totally
Biggest hurdle.
done.
there was no
Oh,
contention around the land. We
Yeah.
knew what we were gonna use. It was right there, but paid for, owned already.
Design considerations.
Right, so it was very different in that respect.
One other aspect that I'll put a plug in for is I think Todd needs to have a very central role.
In what?
In sharing the committee.
In all the things.
And I think that's gonna be really important, and he has, but I would, recommend that be maintained, going forward.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, the steering committee that we had in 2019 that we started with the numbers you mentioned was a very effective
Yeah.
group. I mean, we met a lot and we got a lot done, went through a lot. And you said that had 6 community members.
Yeah,
Um,
the original one.
So, I mean, since then, we've community members, like, I mean, we haven't dropped them, they just, we haven't had as many
They got-
people show
They got
up.
to that point,
Um,
and then it kind of dropped out during the next phase.
yeah,
Yeah.
so we've, struggled a little bit to keep that number up. And I think it has, it's important to keep that number up, so we maybe going to something, hopefully not in anticipation of having people, drop on their own again, but
Yeah, you
going
need
more to
some-
like 8 or so,
Yeah.
I feel like is a good number to shoot for,
I would-
for a steering committee.
And then,
we had-
and
I
then,
think 8 to
and
10.
allowing anybody or inviting anybody else in, like.
Okay,
Tina
so,
said.
I'm just taking notes for
Get it on.
for next week. Okay, so
9 for a
8
voting.
to 10 community members for the steering committee.
Started off right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's gonna be others besides that.
I'm
Yeah.
just gonna offer that I do think that if we have a large number of community members who are interested in assisting with the project, why would we want to limit that?
Yeah.
Oh, I
Sure.
think what they're talking about is the steering committee
Steering
that
committee.
leads the
Okay.
committee, and then the
Yeah.
larger committee would be anybody. Yeah, so like, let's replace the word steering with management committee. That's actually,
But I don't
So-
think we need 8 or 10 people, because a steering committee by design should be tight.
Yeah.
Right? Because otherwise, we're talking about a committee this size steering, right? Like, the building committee should be large, a steering committee should be like representative group of what you consider for that larger piece.
Right.
I still think you're gonna
That's
need,
really what we did in 2019.
Yeah.
And I mean, it came from a pool of like, I don't know, 50 people showed up at that first session. They had to narrow way down to that 6.
Yeah.
So I think that having fewer than 6 would worry me, that you're not getting good representation of the
Yeah.
community.
even with the steering committee, I think you need good cross-sectional community representation, and you need to build in a little bit of buffer for anybody that may need to transition out. Give you time to,
yeah,
you have a little bit of,
really, like, I'm trying to think this through, because really what you're talking, I think what the word, like, we were calling it an advisory group for a little while, right, versus steering committee, that's kind of, and that, I'm trying to think of how many people were on that, I think that was 6 or 7, right? And that number seemed to work good, but if you allow everyone to participate in the larger community, to your point, then do you have that larger committee? Maybe the steering committee piece is the, application process,
yeah.
right? Because then you can select specific
Yeah.
competencies that you're looking for.
I would go back to the Wentworth. What
Yeah.
you guys had for Wentworth, which is,
Yeah.
what the intention was, and we did to a certain degree have this with what we had, we just didn't have many people on the steering committee. because you had the communications group, which was, you know, we had the, sustainability team. I think you're just doing that, but on a bigger scale.
Yeah.
So you're steering committee, and then you have sort of the larger building committee, but you're gonna have to sort of break it up into groups with specific
Right.
charges, which is, I think, what you
Yeah.
guys did with Wentworth, right? Eventually, yeah.
Yeah, I think you almost set it up like the board, right? Like, or the town council. You're on the committee, you're committing to being on the committee. And then as part of that commitment, you're a part of a subcommittee.
Yes.
Just like we have committee assignments on the board and town council, kind of the same
Mhm.
overarching.
One consideration when you're considering your appointments, and we did this on our ad hoc community center, is we left 3 spaces in our charge for people that served on the 2019 committee, because then they brought that institutional knowledge, so whatever number you pick, maybe reserve a couple seats where people apply. And you're bringing that institutional knowledge, but leaving plenty of seats, obviously, so if it's, I'm making up the number, let's say it's 7, 3 people, 4 at large, whatever the number is to fill.
Yeah.
That you have some connectivity between the 2
Great idea.
groups.
That's a good idea.
Mhm.
I do have one question about, because this is the one I was talking with Jeff about. I've been rolling it around in my head. If we allow anyone who wants to be part of the committee to be a part of the committee, how do you know what quorum is? So how did Wentworth, how did you set quorum to vote? If you don't know what the number of the committee is
But you do, because once it's seated, it's seated,
for the
right?
year.
Right? So you say, who's who's interested in serving on the committee? And everyone in this room raises their
50
hand.
show up.
Now we're all part of the building committee, right?
Okay.
And we count and we say, that's 42 people. So quorum for 42 would be X, right? We're
Right.
not, we wouldn't be necessarily onboarding new people every meeting, like, Jen
Right.
couldn't come to the next meeting and say, well, today I'm on the building committee.
Right.
Right,
Right.
and then Anne couldn't come in 3 months and say, now I'm on the building committee. There would be one seating for that. And then once you have a seated committee, it would work from that.
Got it.
It's just,
Okay. I think I feel like we've got enough for next Thursday. Do you?
Oh, yeah, I think so.
And I think to clarify one thing, if you seated, say, 42 people and 5 dropped away, would that open 5 seats for new applicants?
how did you guys do that with Wentworth? Or people just
No.
stayed?
People stayed. On the larger committee, people did phase out. There were a couple of town council members who joined, and then they didn't rerun, so they just kind of phased themselves out. Carol Raincourt was one that I remember. We had 10 people. I just kind of racked my brain for a minute and wrote down the members of the steering committee, and we had 3 board members at the time on the steering committee, and then we had for community members, and Joanne Sizemore and I were the only 2 school administrator types. And then there was Paul Kozel, and there's Kelly Murphy, and Kristen, I can't remember her last name. And Beth Libby was the teacher, and Chris Brownsie was the other board member, and then Anne Mary Dexter, who was the principal at the time of the old Wentworth. So there were 10 of us. So, and realistically, the school board members and the counselors were also community members. Who've
Right.
been here a long time with a lot of school and community knowledge, so.
Yeah, so if I wrote down 6 community members for the steering committee, but if there's a spot for a counselor, a spot for the school board member. Right, then you're kind of, and then a spot for an administrator on that, then you're expanded out, so that would be 9 right there.
April had her hand up earlier. I don't know.
I did. I'm struggling a little bit. What is the distinction between what the steering committee would be doing versus what the larger committee would be doing? And I ask that because I feel like at this point, the steering committee has a really big task of trying to identify once again what the problem we all agree to be trying to solve is, and then what the potential solutions are. And so that seems like a really big job for 6 people or 9 people, but also not manageable with 42. And so to Dave's point, like when we originally formed that steering committee and we put X number of community members on it and board members and counselors, and whatever. We did that really purposefully, knowing that they were going to boil the bigger problem down to a single recommendation. And then once we had that recommendation, we did expand the committee to pretty much anybody who wanted to do it. We just had a hard time driving engagement. And so my concern is that right now, I don't really understand the distinction that we're making between like what the building steering committee would be, because we have people, I think, who from the community have expressed interest in having a say in what the solution is. And so I just want to make sure that we understand the different charges, I guess, between what the steering committee would be versus what the larger committee would be. And then the other point I wanted to make is we are at a huge advantage this time because the 2019 committee was pre-COVID and we just didn't have a precedent for taping meetings and having everything be really public and really welcoming the public the way that we do now. And so I think that this committee is already off to a better start in terms of engagement, just because of where we are in time.
Do you want to speak, Todd, to the steering committee, advisory committee?
Yeah, the steering
Well-
committee didn't vote and make major decisions. They just set the agendas and drove the project forward with an agenda, timeline, tasks to be completed. Took it back to the main building committee and then broke the big building committee up into subcommittees. We had a site committee, we had an interior finishes committee, we had sustainability, HVAC, mechanical. We had way more subcommittees than this group had. And we had everything nailed down. Because we had a big committee, we had enough people to participate within the committee we had subcommittee members that weren't even part of our building committee on this group. Like our sustainability committee, there were people that attended just those little meetings and never attended the building committees. Like, so it was very, very different this time around, and it was the first time. And so to answer your question, April, the steering committee didn't vote to make major decisions. The overall building committee still, as a larger group, made the votes, and
Yeah.
and
And I
made the
think it's-
decisions
I think
and made
it's
the
a matter of,
recommendations to the
like,
board.
finding that sweet spot, right? Because I think that, to your earlier comment, it's healthy to have disagreement at the table and
Yeah.
dialogue at
Yeah.
the table.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
there were,
And we
there
need
were-
to have that on a,
Yeah.
we need to have that on a regular basis to a certain degree so
Right.
that we have an understanding of, what is the community mirroring to us.
Right.
And so even with the steering, this might be beating a dead horse, and I apologize for this, but even with the steering committee, I would just say like adding more new blood is gonna be really important because everything is gonna be looked at in the past in terms of what, how we went about it or whatever, and we just want to make sure that we are giving that opportunity for more.
I believe the more the better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
You know,
I totally agree with trying to keep some people that have been, through it throughout. But definitely giving that opportunity for a few more community members would be important.
Great, glad I asked. That was super helpful. Thanks, guys.
So the chair of the committee was part of the steering committee.
Correct.
Yeah, and the
Paul
vice chair,
Frisell was
was
the
the
chair
chair.
of the whole committee, but he also drove
on that.
the steering committee forward as well.
It was such a different time though, because the charge was incredibly clear.
Right, yep.
Yeah.
To get a new Whitworth built, it was not a K-8 problem, it was not a middle school Wentworth problem, it was strictly a 3 through 5 charge. And I feel like it's still so muddy about what the charge is. A K-12 solution for enrollment, yes. But right now, K-2 has been the primary participation in this regard, and I'm not trying to put more work on my colleagues. Trust me, I know they do not need to have another meeting to come to at night. But this is a bigger, the school board needs to really make sure that your charge is very clear and very specific before any committee is seated, because you're going to get a very different group of people if you're talking about a K-2 building than if you're talking about a K-8 solution. And does it mean this and does it mean that? And I feel like because of COVID, because I've been on both the 2017, the 2019, the 2023, been there, done it. It's not clear. Like, I don't think the public knows what exactly they need or want yet, because it morphed from a pre-K to 2 building to a K to 3 building, then moving the kids to Wentworth from middle school, and all good solutions, nothing wrong with them, but I just feel like the school board needs to make a really clear message about what this committee is actually charged with doing, because until you know that, who knows if they want to be on it or not?
Yeah, because the charge, again, from the historical documents isn't even accurate to date, because to your point, the original charge was K2.
Right.
And then
COVID hit, and then we came back, and it was suddenly a very different building. It was a completely different plan.
Yeah.
I'd like to just like take this opportunity to harken back to what we started the meeting by saying, which was, we have to be very clear about what our priorities are. We have a lot of wishes and wants, but we talked earlier about how we have to focus in on our needs. And while our K-2 enrollment is going to balloon to the point that it hits a capacity we can't accommodate, that's coming. We know that's coming the fall of 27. The other need that I want us to not forget is our 6th grade is sitting in portables.
Yep.
And the 6th graders sitting in portables 15 years ago, it had another aspect to it besides just that the portables were newer. We live in a different time than we did 15 years ago in terms of school safety and security.
Yep.
And I think when we prioritize our needs, we can't just say, oh, we just have to fix the enrollment side of the K-2 problem. The 6th grade problem is a need.
Yeah.
It's not a want.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I think that, you know, when we talk about setting, what are we solving for? You know, I think you definitely don't want to look at it as just a K-2. And that was one of the reasons why the solution that was proposed, you know, included the shifting of the grades. But certainly none of those things should be overlooked, and I agree. I think that, like, that the math problem needs to be clearly stated before anybody starts to go to work on it.
Right. Because we could stand here all night and talk about what ifs and we coulds and we might not and we should. But until we know what we're really focused on solving, we're just spinning our wheels.
And that's where I think, you know, again, my recommendation, I said before, I really think that this conversation that we're having should be a collective conversation between town council and the school board, because I think there's something that, you know, the middle school is definitely a challenge. The existing schools are a challenge, and I think need to make sure that there's a clear understanding of where the pressures are and then what needs to be solved for. And I think that's probably the first and most important thing before you do any of the other stuff, you know.
But
Well, and
I
in
feel
the
like,
meantime, we're gonna be triaging redistricting.
Yeah.
Potentially, and transportation, about shifting kids around to where there's more space, and Pleasant Hills doesn't have any more room. We need to shift people. When's that gonna happen? I've been around for all of that too, so I saw a parent who was here whose kids are probably now gone, but there's not very many people who've been here that long to see all that have happened. So it takes all of us, and it's gonna take a lot of different pieces before 2027.
Yeah, we're gonna have to really explain to the community, like, I just think we're gonna really have to help people understand or give them the opportunity to weigh in on. There are a lot of issues, and I don't think it's well understood, and I think the K-8, you know, we thought it made sense because we were all in it, but really, people are like, what? You're building a kindergarten through 8th. I mean, there was so much confusion around that. I don't, you know, I don't know if we start now explaining what the issues are, right?
I mean, I feel like the problem was, well, I feel like what I heard from the public was They understood the problem, they understood the need. They just didn't feel like the solution was the right solution. So I think you said it well, like we have a K-2 challenge and we have a 6th grade challenge. What we put forward didn't work. So what are the other ideas to still address those 2 problems? Things you can do are going to be limiting, where again, the committee has to help guide with the data, the facts, the information we have on what's possible, because some things are just not feasible, even if it's a good idea. But to me, that's like, I love the idea of reconstituting the building committee with more engagement from the public to problem solve together. And honestly, they may come to the same conclusion that a consolidated, like what we put forward was the right solution or the best solution at the end of the day, but we have to go through that process with the public and make them more involved.
Right.
Like my read of the situation was, you know, I think with this particular project, there were so many starts and stops over the years that it never truly got the public momentum it needed to have it be successful at the polls. Now we have momentum. People are willing to kind of roll up their sleeves and get involved. Let's give them an opportunity to get involved and help us solve the 2 problems that we need to solve for and come up with alternative solutions. And again, if we get to the same conclusion in the end, then hopefully people will better see why that was the right solution, or maybe there's a better solution that we just didn't see and need to kind of work through that motion. So I love the idea of charging a large group of residents to partner to solve the 2 problems. And again, we can give them the 2 problems and we can give them some of the facts of like, based on the engineering report, you cannot add on top of the current schools. So like, that is not an option, but you could add a separate building and add floors, but you're limited to square footage. So like, again, how do we engage the public in some creative problem solving to see what we get and then kind of go from there?
All right.
All right, so we are almost at 7:30 here and we have to allow for public comment. If you wanna,
Yeah, come on.
wrap it up, and anybody else have anything that we wanted to go through before we go into public comment? Okay, so.
So
Shannon,
I'll control back here too, so if anybody online wants to raise their hand, and anybody, if you just want to ask them if they want to raise their hand.
Yeah, so if
And
anybody
then
wants
anybody
to,
here.
yeah, and I think there, so if anybody does want to make public comment, you can either raise your hand online or you can come up here to the podium, so that people can hear you.
We have the, our machine is, I don't even know what this machine is called, but our machine is working today. So it'll give you the 3-minute, it'll show green when it's time to start, and then yellow is your warning and red is your time's up. All right?
Hi, I'm Marvin Gates. 423 Black Point Road. I speak rather slowly, so I probably don't have that much to say that is going to come out in the 3 minutes. I have done, well, first of all, let me say, I'm going to be the purveyor of bad news in a certain sense. And I've dug deep into all of the last 21 meetings that you've had since the beginning of January 2022. I have one question. Is it still project number 20308? Because that's what we've been doing, or do you start completely over with a new project number? Maybe that's a little too technical. I think you have more than a perceptual problem insofar as the referendum was defeated rather dramatically. So I really don't think, I think you need to focus on the committee. And I think everybody's here because this is a committee meeting, So we're not, at least I only speak for myself, I'm not that interested in the survey or in how you're going to communicate. I'm interested in how you're going to form your committee, period. And so hopefully that makes sense. I've looked, first of all, your last committee had a total of 28 members over the 21 meetings. Now, some of those dropped off, some of them stayed on, but maybe 2 handfuls, 10, were here for more than half the meetings. The others weren't. And that's more than a perceptual problem. And I realize you've talked about having a commitment to having to be at meetings. But if you look back at the way this is run, and I'm not going to draw any conclusions, it just doesn't look as though it was very efficient and wasn't run very well, honestly, because it was, and I'm not, God bless you and thank you so much for everything you did, Dana. It's just so incredible, the amount of work you've put in. You know, in a sense, I'm sorry it didn't pass for all the work that you did put in, but it didn't in such a dramatic way. And I see my time going. I rambled. I just think that if you were to take a straw poll, and I'm not suggesting you do it, and say, who here voted for it? And who here voted against it? I have a hunch that the majority here voted for it, and the majority here voted against it. And here is the group that's listening to you so attentively, but they're not saying anything. And here's the group that is doing all the talking. So somehow, and I think that's done by structuring the committee. Thank you very much.
Any other public comment?
Good evening, everybody. Peter Hayes, 5 Union Lane. Thank you. I listened to the conversation. Just a couple things, a couple observations. But first, I'll start with a quote from Albert Einstein saying, you know, we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking that created them. So we'll kind of use that as a framework. 2, I heard a lot of conversation about all we need to do is educate the community about what the issues are. And I'll harken back to where the conversation started. There are some real trust issues with the community. And so what we need to think about in that education, how can we agree on what the facts are that we're going to use to guide our conversations? Because as we know, there are different opinions about the facts that have been out there. The facts to one group of people are not the same facts to another. So again, there's a trust issue. We do need to educate, but I think you need to give the public some credit. They did understand some of the issues. I don't think it's as simple as cost was number 1 and something else was number 2. There were several issues that brought a lot of people to the table. You didn't even mention access to Sawyer Road. There are 2 community groups that formed around that. So I'll leave that with you. And then I served on the council for 6 years, as people know. And what I said then, I still kind of see it. We have adopted sort of a culture where it's a father knows best sort of model, where it's being top driven. People are getting together, deciding what the community wants and needs, and then trying to market that to the community. So it's top driven. I'd really encourage, and part of this conversation, it should be from the bottom up. How do you get the people in the community to step forward and say, this is what we want, and give that clear message about what it is we want to do? But even in this conversation, we're talking about using the same process that led to the referendum defeat. We're just going to replicate that and move forward. So I really encourage you we need to think differently. And then I heard the committee members need to be people that have a cross section of skills. I would argue you need to have the committee be a cross section of the voting community, the people that are actually going to come to the polls and vote either yes or no. It's not the skills, it's what does the community, what can they afford? What can they support? What do they want? I don't think you've even answered what the community wants, never mind the affordability issue. So those are just my observations. I really think about reconstituting the committee is going to be key for a fresh start to get people engaged. Thank you.
I just comment on that. Is that okay?
Was that?
Could I just comment? I mean, I thought that's what we were doing, but that's why I'm kind of surprised at the comment, just because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to find more ways to get that sort of input. But so we're looking for those ideas. I mean,
Talk to us. Talk to We've been sitting here for an hour and a half. And you haven't even asked us, any of us, a question. Engaged, because you coming to the meeting, sitting here 90 minutes with no chance for input is not.
Well, that was, I mean, that was the format of the meeting, was the public comment would come, but I mean, we definitely want to hear like the comments, and that's what we're here for that.
Okay.
Yes.
Richard Hayes, Martin Avenue. First off, I voted no on the project. For a few reasons. You solved one of the major things by eliminating the downs. John Anderson said it tonight. That's a major problem for me, and I think a lot of other people. There are a lot of other issues, and other reasons why it failed. I'm 100% against the survey. We don't need to look back. We need to look forward. I attended a meeting many, many years ago, run by a gentleman who was an extremely smart businessman. And he had in every one of his offices a sign on the wall that said, "No one in this room is smarter than all of us." I suggest that, as this lady said, I'm sorry, I don't know your name. If you have 25, 30 people, 40 people willing to come to meetings and give input, you're gonna be a whole lot better off than limiting to 6, 7 people. That's, Mr. Gates pointed out, or I believe it was. I'm sure everybody over here voted yes. You don't have enough votes to pass it. You need, 5,900 people said no. You need to convince a lot of people that there's a project that can pass. And you only get there by listening. I'll leave with one final comment that my dad told me when I first started in sales. You learn a lot more with your mouth shut than you do with it open. Thank you.
I'm Sue Hamill, and you all know me. I've been to probably almost every meeting this year. And I do appreciate the amount of work that everyone put in on this project. I have just a couple of things. First, people really did understand what the proposal was. They understood what the problem was. Most voters voted no for a reason. And it wasn't that they misunderstood what was being proposed. There's one person who I think should have been here tonight and should have been present throughout much of the process. Not here tonight. And I'm not going to mention who he is, but it seems like there needs to be a driver of this project. And we don't have a driver. One thing that I have talked about before is that this building committee and the Board of Ed did exactly what they were supposed to do. And they created their dream school. And that's what legally, that's their responsibility is to the students. But it's the town council that has the responsibility to make sure that it's a proposal that will pass. And the town council didn't do their job. And I think that those two groups really need to cooperate on this. It needs to be elevated. It is a town issue. It's not a school issue. This meeting tonight was not on the town website. It's on the school website. And that has to change. If you want people to come to these meetings, they have to be on, and there've been a number of other meetings whenever there's a workshop. Oh, well, if it's sponsored by the school, it's not on the town website and no one knows about it. And that has to change. I'm concerned that if we have a lot of the same members on the new committee, it'll be a committee that we can't do that. We tried that. We looked at that. And that can't happen. When I think about, I know one of the suggestions that I had made, and I certainly don't know anything about the buildings, the way they're constructed, but putting an addition on the middle school can't be done because of the way the utilities are brought in. And we talked about that at a couple of meetings. Well, for $16 million, I think that, you could probably do that. That's the cost of the land. So we need to take a fresh look at everything. Everything. Putting a second floor on the buildings. It's been done in the past in other places. Thanks.
Please go ahead. Thank you.
Hi, hello, I'm Gail Graves. I live at 199 Holmes Road. And I kind of just want to start off saying that I think the broader thing of when somebody says we need to educate the community isn't saying that the people who are here aren't educated. Because the thing is that, we talk about how big a number of no votes there were. But that percentage is of the people who voted. It does not include a lot of the people who didn't vote. And Sue, when you said about the reason why we can't build on top of the middle school, I didn't know that was what that issue was. I moved here in 2019 and I only got involved in the knowing of this 6 months ago. And I know I'm not alone. And I have a child who is on the cusp of being in that 2027 kindergarten group. So he's not counted in that survey, but he was born April 26th. He may or may not be in that group. So that's like a major concern for me. But there are lots of other families that are out there that were in the same position I am or are in the same position I was. I had no idea what I was getting into when I just went for a tour of the school that my son was going to attend. That was all I did. And it was pretty jarring. I agree with things on every side of it. And so I can't wait to see what the community all comes up with together, because this isn't a individual problem, it's a community problem. And while we all have our own wants and needs, and we can definitely be selfish in what, we go out and talk about, that, it's not just all about my family. It's about everybody's family. My son has special needs and he's going to need a lot from the schools, and the schools are really limited in what they can provide, despite what great faculty there is. Teachers can only be as good as the resources they're given. And I say that as a former teacher. The space isn't there and the safety is just huge. I went to high school way longer before this. And we had 2 classes in a portable. And multiple times the gas station across the street was robbed. And there was no way for them to know. And I can't imagine that as much as we try to do for getting the safety to all these portables, you're just so limited. And portables aren't the answer. And I'm sorry I rambled on a little bit there, but I just thought that was important.
Doug Friedman, 17 Lillian Way. I've lived in Scarborough since 1999. My ex-wife and I moved to Scarborough specifically because of the school system. My son was going into 1st grade at the time. We liked a local school, and we liked something we no longer have, I believe, is multi-age. My son thrived under that system. My son went through the entire system. My son is 30 years old now. He went through and he was in portables along the way. For me, it's far more important the teacher than the portable. That's me. 23,000 people in Scarborough. I'm sure everyone has different opinions, but so I just want to give an idea of my demographics and why we moved to Scarborough. In terms of the survey, I think it is crucial. I disagree. I think it is absolutely fundamental. You had half of the voters in the town did vote, they did engage, and we need to understand, based on people's demographics, what are they thinking? People that have kids that are about to go into the school system are going to probably think differently from those like me that has kids that are out of the school system. Am I willing to support the school system? Yes, I am. Do I have the financial wherewithal to do that? Yes, I do. Some people don't. So I think that the survey, and it has to be a well-done survey, where you ask about the demographics of the person answering the survey, so you get better information. Did people understand? I'll speak for myself. I didn't fully understand. I understood that we had a problem with the K-1-2 schools, that we were going to balloon out, and so we had to solve that. Did I really have a good understanding of all this juggling of the other grades? I really didn't. Did I know how much, all of the sixth grade class is in portables? I probably didn't. Was my son in a portable? I think he was in sixth grade, and that's a long time ago. So, but I didn't know everything that's going on. And if I didn't know, I'm sure there are other people in town that didn't fully understand. And we really need to know, what is it that people want? And we're going to have very different things. We're going to have some people say, I want a school where I can walk my kid to school. I don't want my kid going for half an hour on a bus ride twice a day with potentially, I don't even know what age would be on that bus. Would it go up to sixth graders? I don't want my kindergartner on a bus with a sixth grader for half an hour twice a day. I'm sure you're going to have all those kind of opinions. I think the price of this building, 160 million, was a huge shock to many people in the community. We built Wentworth, if I recall, for something like 43 or 45 million.
37.
Pardon?
37.
For 37 million. So adding on 37 million, adding on the 7 million of the land purchase, that gets us up to 30, to the number that I said. Bringing inflation over the last 10 years, even with the extreme inflation the last few years, doesn't get you anywhere near 160 million. So I think people are sort of questioning that. I see I'm out of time. There's plenty of other things I could talk about. I hope that you will invite us, members of the public that want to join something. Whatever it is you decide, I'm certainly willing to step up, as long as it isn't 24/7, 365.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Carol. I live on 27 Jamico Mill Road in Scarborough. And want to thank you all for the time and effort that you put in. And I know it's been a difficult time for you relative to the non-passing of the school law. However, the citizens have chosen to go in another direction. You have chosen tonight to bring us in to your group here and listen to suggestions. And I think that's a good thing. I think it was April in the last town council meeting said, I think one of the things that we did wrong was we made a decision before we told the public. Those were close to her words, I'm not sure, something like that. So I think this is an opportunity to engage the public. The public wants to be involved. I don't think there should be a line from here. It's not us and you. So I hope that with this new event, that we can provide ideas. And I'm going to give you an example of an idea, because there are many. I don't think we should be focusing on a school or a piece of land. I think there are many considerations relative to the neighborhood schools, relative to expansion on the middle school to put it all together. I think all ideas should be listened to. No idea should be put down because the land's too soft or it costs too much
or we can't do that, because I've heard all of those things in the meetings I was on. Nita and myself and one other person was in on many of the meetings from the get-go with the school. And it was obvious to us that the decision had already been made. So it's kind of hard to go to a meeting and present your position when the decision has already been made. So I hope that we will do a sifting down of ideas. John said something about ad hoc feedback, community sessions. Somebody made mention that the survey is not enough. And I agree with that. You will get some detail from a survey, but you're not going to get the input that you're getting here tonight in real words from a survey. So I hope we take all of these ideas, and I happen to be a person that's big on cost. So I hope we take all these ideas and provide function for a need that's within a reasonable cost. And that's what I'm hoping for. Thank you.
Any other public comment this evening? Yeah.
Jim Pritchard, Maple Ave. Just like to make an observation. We've been up here, you folks spoke for an hour and a half. You opened up to the public to get their feedback. They get halfway, quarter way through what they're saying. We got this thing blinking and you shut us off. That sends a message. You really don't want to hear from us. This thing should go away. At board meetings, at council meetings, you take an hour and a half, the public should get an hour and a half feedback, some input. Because the message you're sending is, you're not really interested. You got 3 minutes and that's it. Our minds are made up. It comes down to communication. If you're really interested in hearing what we're saying, you get rid of this thing immediately and take time and listen to us. Don't play with phones, don't play with computers. Look at us, pay attention to what we're saying. And I think that's part of the problem that happened with the vote. They've already made up their mind. They don't want to hear from us. We'll fix them. We'll shut them off. The other thing is communication. I attended 2 meetings. And I heard the superintendent go down through the different costs. And at the end of his comments, he said, the additional cost for the 4th school would be $200 million. Now, I know he misspoke. For the total cost for everything was 200 million. But that one word, additional, shut people off. Because if you took the 160 with the 200 million, you're at $360 million. Yeah. We're not that stupid. But people hooked onto that. And for the record, I voted no, because I don't think young people should be in mega schools. It may be fine for their education, but their social education, it really affects them. Because a lot of little kids don't do well in major crowds. Thank you.
Take a minute to check in online if there's anybody on the call that wants to make a public comment. Any other public comment from the room? Okay, with that, I'll motion to conclude tonight's meeting. Have a second. All those in favor? Thank you very much.